It may seem like a lifetime away for those in the middle of the war, but there will one day be a post-Putin Russia. Maybe it will be the case because Putin is done, and the consequences of the war itself will force him out of office. Or maybe it will be because he is 73 years old, and Father Time eventually comes for all of us. Either way, it will happen, and you can bet that teams of policymakers across Europe are already trying to plan for that eventuality. So, on today's edition of the Geopolitics Helpline, we examine what post-Putin East-West relations might look like. When Putin is done. For real though, will Russia be able to normalize relations with Europe without completely capitulating to the continent? Will the EU want a partner in Russia, or will there be too little trust, assuming whatever government finds itself running Russia wants to pursue this after the war? I suspect that today is going to be one of those videos where I have a bunch of individually coherent thoughts that combine together to create an incoherent mess. But here goes. We need to cover what a post-Putin Russia most likely looks like, how a new leader would affect trade flows, how trade flows are partially locked in because of the war, and some of the lessons of the post-Cold War era. The first is a point that you have heard from me many times before, so I will make it quick. There is a perception among the casual audience of the war that Putin is solely responsible for the war, and it will terminate upon him leaving office. Well, one, the new leader is not just going to hand eastern Ukraine back to Kyiv. That would be a great way for them to immediately lose all domestic support. So you might also need to ask yourself whether Ukraine would want the war to end at that point. And two, bargaining frictions are what cause wars. If the bargaining friction prolonging this one is Russian intelligence indicating that the West will eventually buckle, contrary to the West's own assessment, then a new leader does not change a thing here. We cannot begin a normalization process until that happens. So, unfortunately, there is a bit of a strike against the relevance of this question from the start. Individually coherent thought number two is that there is a more plausible way to explain how a new leader could get you to a settlement. I find it funny how this does not receive the same attention that the "lol, this is all Putin's fault" argument gets, even though this one might actually get us some progress. States have to weigh the problems that bargaining frictions raise against the costs of war. For example, you might not know what the other side's bottom line is in bargaining. But if war will be incredibly expensive for you, it might not be worth trying to extract as much as you possibly could, assuming that your most optimistic intelligence assessments are correct. Sure, you could gain a bit more by driving a harder bargain, but that inherently comes with a higher risk of war. Well, remember that the costs of war are opportunity costs. Thus, we include anything of value that would be created in peace that war otherwise prohibits. I have no doubt that some of the de facto trade barriers that exist between Russia and Europe are Putin-specific. In other words, some Europeans specifically dislike Putin, and they have no interest in trading with Russia until he is gone. If a new leader comes into the fold, these Europeans will be willing to humor him. Not hunt him, as my autofill wanted me to write, which would be very different, but humor him. Point is, continued war will be immediately more costly once a new leader comes into place. For most bargaining frictions, adding to the opportunity cost of war makes the parties more inclined to adopt safer bargaining strategies. In turn, Putin's departure might break the gridlock, but no promises. Individually coherent thought number three is that the value of this foregone trade is lower than it otherwise ought to be. This is both discouraging political entrepreneurs in Russia from trying to remove Putin, and will limit the peace-inducing effect afterward. Nord Stream is the clearest example of what I mean. When the pipeline suddenly suffered a special leaking misoperation back in 2022, the obvious culprit was Ukraine, which Western intelligence increasingly agrees is the case. But in the absence of actually knowing, I spent substantial time explaining why Putin would have a motive to do it as well, even though it was Russia's own pipeline. The basic idea is that someone wanting to initiate a coup to restore the pipeline's sales literally could not do that anymore. So no incentive for a coup, no coup attempted. Putin loses out on some revenue, but that is better than losing office. Even though that is not likely what happened, and even though it has taken 4 years, now we have reached the point where the logic matters again. And this is further why understanding incentive structures is more important in geopolitical analysis than pretending to be confident that we know exactly what is going on. Anyway, the short version is that we cannot simply flip a switch to turn the pipeline back on. The infrastructure for that trade value is just gone. And it is one that especially hurts, because energy trade, even in contentious times, is relatively easy. Heck, just think about how much gas Russia transited through Ukraine, even though they were literally killing each other. Then there are some more subtle effects, like Russia having set up the infrastructure to expand trade with China, or Europe having invested in various measures to make it less reliant on Russian energy. Or how about Western businesses having sold off operations inside of Russia? Sure, they could go back, but it'll require significant new investments in an area rife with uncertainty. Renewed trade will still create additional wealth for both parties, of course. It is just that it will bring less wealth than may have been the case a while back. And so that added value of trade post-Putin, which should help resolve the conflict, might not be as helpful as it first appears. My final individually coherent thought, and the one that most directly answers the viewer's original question, is that there is a lesson Europe has learned from before. I feel like we are in a bit of an analogous situation as the interwar period. The winners of World War I screwed up by really trying to stick it to Germany, directly leading to the domestic turmoil that eventually grew into World War II. Having learned their lesson, the Western Allies worked toward building up West Germany and Japan. The strategy worked. 80 years later, both are still solid members of the Western coalition. Fast forward to today, and one wonders if Europe will apply a similar lesson from the inter-Cold War period. Now, I do not want to suggest that the West is solely responsible for the rise of Putin. I also do not want to suggest that NATO enlargement eastward was the problem, or even a misguided idea. A slab of the Berlin Wall is right next to the entrance of NATO's Brussels headquarters. They are serious about Europe never being divided again, and integration of former Warsaw Pact members was the best way to guarantee that. However, financially speaking, Russia was not set up for success after the Soviet Empire fell apart. There was no direct successor to the Marshall Plan. Moscow was not anchored to the Western economic order, which goes well beyond simply selling gas to Germany. The vast majority of the help that Russia received came in the form of loans. This saddled Moscow with debt obligations, constraining the government when further economic troubles surfaced. Average Russians did not have much purchase into the system, which helped build the narrative that the West preyed upon Russia after the Cold War ended. Putin rode that narrative to his current empowered position as an autocrat. He likes to describe the fall of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Heck, average Russians now have positive sentiments regarding Stalin. He had flaws, yes, but he made Russia a serious player in the global order. The point is, Europe is kind of stuck here. No doubt there are a lot of frustrated Europeans who would like to stick it to Russia. Not Putin, but the country of Russia. Doing that, though, would seem to just be setting up the continent for more problems down the line. Consequently, I suspect that the parties will be heading toward reconciliation post-Putin, but we will have to see how effective that is a second time around. Would you ever reconcile with me if I did not deliver a video tomorrow? Well, let's not worry about that for now. But the archive of the Geopolitics Helpline series might tide you over if I ever do. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Probably. Almost definitely. Take care.